Well, hey, AP Biology. So this is chapter 2, and this is about the chemistry and energy of life. A big part of this is water, okay? And so water is really important when it comes to life. And so it's so important that drinking plain water is associated with a decreased risk of depression and anxiety in adults. And so if you look at this and the results, there's an inverse association between plain water consumption and depression. Inverse, which means if there's more water that you drink, you're less likely to become depressed. Pretty impressive how important water is, not just to our normal bodily functions, but also to our normal bodily functions of trying to maintain mental health. And so, of course, reviews, protons have positive charges, chemistry of life, neutrons are neutral, and then there's negative, and these are called obviously electron shells or energy levels. And so I don't know if you ever heard the term "you're mostly space," but I'm made up of empty space. But if the nucleus was the size of a baseball, the nearest electrons would orbit about 2.5 miles away. That's pretty impressive to think that all that space is inside of an atom. So chemical elements, matter is defined as anything that has mass and occupies space. That is just a definition. Matter exists, of course, in solid, liquid, and gas, and all matter is composed of elements. Elements are a pure substance that only contains one kind of atom. And so this is where we get these letters right here. And these letters make up the majority of biological systems. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And so you can see right here that organisms also show similarities in some parts to the earth itself, and of course creation was created by the Lord. And so an atom is the smallest part of an element that displays the property of an element, and then an element and its atom share the same name. And so protons, of course, positive charge, neutrons are neutral, and electrons are negative. And so you can see right here is proton 1 and then a neutral charge, okay? Atomic number, this is all review from chemistry. And so the atomic number is equal to the number of protons. The mass number is protons and neutrons, and atomic mass is equal to the mass number, okay? And so isotopes are really important, especially when it comes to like cancer treatments and certain treatments and scans and all that sort of stuff in biology. And so isotopes are atoms of the same element that differ in the number of neutrons. And so some isotopes spontaneously decay. Okay, so some isotopes are radioactive. So carbon-12 is stable, carbon-13, and then carbon-14 is radioactive, which means they give off energy and it decays. Can be harmful or helpful. And so here's examples of uses of low radiation. You can inject radioactive isotopes. Radioactive isotopes right here. And you can see that these radioactive isotopes show where cells are using like hyper growing and hyperactivity. And so that could be an indication of cancer. And then this, of course, is chemo, where we use chemicals to destroy quickly dividing cells. Electrons are attracted to positively charged. And then so chapter 2 is also kind of talks about distribution of electrons. And so the Bohr model is a useful way to visualize electron location. So electrons revolve around the nucleus in energy shells. For atoms with atomic numbers of 20 or less, which is basically what we deal with in biology, the first electron shell can hold 2. The second one can hold 8, and each lower shell is filled before the first one. Excuse me, sorry about that. The outermost energy shell is called the valence shell. It's the outermost because it contains a lot of chemical properties. Why are things so reactive? Why do we get such crazy reactions? Because living like atoms are always trying to fill their outermost shell. They're most stable when it has 8 electrons, okay? And so, for example, atoms that have their valence shells filled with electrons tend to be stable, and atoms that do not have their valence shells filled with electrons are chemically reactive. Okay, so a perfect example is H2O. O has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It has 2 openings in its valence shell. It wants to fill those. And so hydrogens come up and give the electron, and you have H2O. So stable versus reactive. And so here's some Bohr models that you can see. Carbon wants to add 4. Nitrogen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it needs 3 more. NH3. Oxygen needs 2. Okay. How many does phosphorus need? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it needs 3 more on the outermost shell. So you can see right here, it's helpful to kind of understand that. Chemical bonds is very important to understand, right? So ionic attraction is the attraction of opposite charges. Covalent is very strong. Look how much energy it takes to break a covalent bond. Very strong covalent bonds, okay? That'll come into play when we talk about DNA and various things all year long. Hydrogen bonds, because hydrogens are so weak, they don't hold much of their electron. The electron's way over here, so they have a partial positive. Oxygen takes more of the electrons, so there's a partial negative. So whenever there's an attraction between a hydrogen and a strongly electronegative atom, that's a hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bonds come into play when we talk about form a lot, the form of proteins, the form of nucleic acids, various things like that. Hydrophobic is fats. They're afraid of water. And so interactions of nonpolar substances, usually they want to stick together. Fats want to stick together. And then van der Waals interactions are just these like interactions of nonpolar substances, but yet there's still unequal sharing of electrons, so there are still differences there. And that's actually what enables like geckos and stuff to climb walls. So you can see right here, sodium and chlorine, you have an ionic attraction right here, and that's sodium chloride, which is salt, which we have to have for our nervous systems to work. Atoms interact and form molecules. And so if atoms have similar electronegativities, they share electrons equally. But it's a non-polar covalent bond. However, if atoms have different electronegativities, which means they have different masses basically, electrons tend to be near the most attractive atom, forming a polar covalent bond. So what that means is this: if there's an atom here and an atom here, and they're sharing an electron, if they share it equally, there's no charge. That's called nonpolar. If there is a charge, like water, right? So oxygen, 2 H's, but the electrons are way more closer to the oxygen atom. So therefore the oxygen is slightly negative and the hydrogens are slightly positive. That is a polar covalent bond. Polar, which means there's a charge. Covalent means they're sharing. And of course, it's a sharing bond. Electronegativity is the ability of an atom to attract electrons towards itself. Okay, so here's our enduring understanding. We got to understand how the properties of water result from its polarity and hydrogen bonding. Okay, we depend on water. Water molecules result in cohesion, adhesion, and surface tension, and their sequence determines the properties of that molecule. So, on your own, of course, we're not doing it in a group because we're doing it at home to save a little time. Describe the ways water is necessary for life, and calculate how much of the fresh water on the planet is available. You don't really have to do that. Describe the factors available. Think about these answers. What would affect the future availability of water? Okay, so again, this is a beautiful picture of water from a textbook that I have. You can see right here, there's properties of water: adhesion, which is this; cohesion, which is sticks to itself. And so water is polar, which means there's a negative and a positive. The electrons are not shared equally. And we already talked about hydrogen bonding being a weak attraction between a slightly positive hydrogen atom and a slightly negative, slightly positive, slightly negative. So why is this important? Proteins, this is super important. I will start this. Helps maintain the proper structure and function of complex molecules such as proteins and DNA. So water molecules cling together because of hydrogen bonding. You can see right here, all of these are hydrogen bonds. The oxygen is connecting to the hydrogen all over the place. And so this association gives water many of its unique chemical properties, such as like These are the properties of water. You need to know these. Water has a high heat capacity, which means it takes a long time to warm up. So it's like a heat sink. I would almost write that down. And that's helpful for thermoregulation. Okay, maintaining internal temperatures, which is homeostasis. Of course, you can see right here the Pacific Ocean is always cooler due to a cold current coming from the north. And thereby you can see the temperatures around the Pacific Ocean, specifically San Diego, 70 degrees pretty much year round. But look at that, just 40 miles inland, man, you're getting tons and tons of heat because the water is not there to regulate it. Water has a high heat of vaporization, which means it takes a lot to evaporate. So this is important for cooling because bodies of organisms cool when their heat is used to evaporate water. That's why we sweat. Water is a good solvent. It's actually called the universal solvent. It can dissolve hydrophilic molecules because phileo means Philadelphia, phileo, city of brotherly love. And so they love water. These are fearful of water. So they do not dissolve in water. Water and oil, water and oil don't mix. And so you can see right here, sodium chloride, they dissolve. And that becomes important electrolytes that we know all too well about. You need a little salt in your diet. Not too much. Most people get way too much. Water molecules are cohesive and adhesive, which means water sticks to itself and water sticks to other polar substances. And this allows for water transport in plants. This is very important. It allows water transport in plants as well as transport in blood vessels. And this would be surface tension, which is created by these properties. Why is that important? Because water sticks to itself. Water can travel up trees hundreds of feet tall. How? Why? Because as water is traveling from the roots up, it's all connected like a chain. So water evaporates, goes into water vapor, and it's just replaced and drawn from the roots. And then water is able to resist downward pull of gravity because it sticks to the sides of the cell walls, which are polar. And so because of cohesion and adhesion, water can travel up. Ice is less dense, which means we have life on this planet. If it wasn't, it would just freeze from the bottom up, and then mostly everything would be frozen. And sea life equals life. And so a pond in winter, you can see the ice layer is there. It's like insulation. So go ahead and take a moment to talk about this and discuss this with yourself. Describe the difference between hydrophobic and hydrophilic in terms of hydrogen bonding, and explain the fact that water forms droplets on the nonpolar waxy surface of a leaf while it readily enters the two made polar substances. What is it about this term that causes water to bead up? Okay. Hey, we're also going to go into pH next, and so this is body image issues. There's a technical word for it. I'm forgetting it. Dysmorphia, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's the correct word, but basically, when you see yourself through air, the lens of your soul and your eyes aren't working correctly, and so it leads to eating disorders. Why is this important? Because it's all about pH. So if you develop bulimia, which is of course throwing up, you can actually cause cancer in your esophagus because of the stomach acid changing the inner cells of the lining. So you can see right here, this is endoscopy, which means the doctor is removing this, and so they're removing right here early cancer using submucosal dissection. But what's happened here is that Barrett's esophagus, the cells lining the esophagus has turned to be more like stomach cells. They have changed because their environment has changed. And why is their environment changed? Because of an eating disorder. So pH is the measure of hydrogen ion concentration in a solution. You have acids, which release hydrogen ions, and bases, which either take them up. Acids and bases are equally powerful as far as, that goes. Of course, 7's neutral, and it's a logarithmic scale. So here's just some examples, right? Stomach acid is crazy. Your stomach kills most of the bacteria that you eat. And then lemon juice and all the way up. You can see milk right here. of it cleaner. Sodium hydroxide or pure lye is crazy dangerous, as well as pure hydrochloric acid. And so buffers, though, living things have buffers. And so buffers is a chemical or combination of chemicals that keeps pH within normal limits. So pH of blood is slightly basic, 7.4. But there's these crazy diseases that happen, acidosis and alkalosis, which if you develop these, I mean, you could really, die or slip into a coma and all sorts of life-threatening situations. And so buffers happen. Buffers are super important when it comes to the ocean. And so some carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dissolves. The ocean is also a CO2 sink, which means more CO2 is in the ocean now. And so carbonic acid reacts with water to form carbonic acid. That carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen ions, which means it's releasing hydrogen ions, which means the ocean will be getting more acidic. And so less calcium CO3 is available for calcification, which means corals are in trouble because the ocean is acidifying. Okay, so more acid means less of what they need. Okay, and so here is some examples of data. Effective calcium carbonate saturation stay on the calcification rate. We'll talk about this data, but I definitely want you to do, we might talk about the other two, but I definitely want you to do a scientific skills activity at the end of your notes, okay? So that's where we'll end for today, but definitely do this because we'll talk about this. It's at the end of your note packet. Thank you for your time. Proud of you for working hard. God bless.